If you say it's a mess, it's a mess, and that's completely okay. When we have a diagnosis, we also have complex emotions that go hand in hand with it. We're having an art therapist present can be really helpful. What is your focus on? Are you thinking more about the pain, or are you letting go of it and relax?
Today we have Heidi Pedersen. Heidi is a registered Canadian art therapist based here in Calgary, Alberta. She has extensive experience working with disabilities and delays, domestic violence, women's anger and empowerment, neurodivergence, and mental health. Heidi is passionate about art and creative techniques to support healing, reduce anxiety, and promote overall well-being. So you can find Heidi at courageousarttherapy.com. Anyway, it's there in the chat. You can also find out more information about art therapy in Canada at canadianarttherapy.org, or in the States, arttherapy.org. So with that not very graceful introduction, I'm going to pass it off to Heidi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're going to do some screen sharing. So bear with us. We'll make sure this is working properly, and then we'll keep moving forward. All right. Are you guys seeing the right screen?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So art therapy and supportive healing. So I know everyone was asked today to have a piece of paper and a mark making utensil with them. If you do, feel free to take that piece of paper, whatever it might be. It could be loose leaf or it could be lined. It really doesn't make a difference. But what you're going to do is you're going to be using your non-dominant hand, and you're going to make a scribble on there. So I want you to do this in a very mindful way. So take a deep breath in first. And on the exhale is when you're going to make the mark on the page. Okay, so breathing in. And you're just going to make a basic scribble. So if we were in person, what I would have you guys do is you would hand your scribble to your neighbor. And your neighbor would take a look at the scribble that you've made, and they would turn it into the first thing that they see. So while we're going through this PowerPoint, feel free to use your mark making utensils and change the scribble that you see in front of you into whatever you see. So this is kind of similar to when we're looking at the clouds when we're kids and we see different shapes in them, different animals, different things like that. Okay, so take your time with this, and if it feels better to just say what it is, write it down as the first thing that you see, and then not make any art, that's okay. If you want to just listen, that's okay. If you want to keep doodling or go on with the art during this process, that's up to you. Okay? All right. So what is art therapy? There's basically different levels of art therapy. There's art psychotherapy, which involves the highly self-reflective process of addressing traumas, complex emotions, and healing. So this is done typically with someone who is a trained psychotherapist. Most art therapists are considered psychotherapists, but how deep they go into the process is determined by the client. There's art as therapy, which is where there's no therapist required. So when you go to art groups, when you go into a pottery class, when you go into other things where the focus is just on the making of the art, that's all good stuff. Art making has intrinsic value, and it is valuable and good for everyone. All right. And then the middle mode, we have art therapy. So that's when there is an art therapist present to support with maximizing the benefits and meeting a person's therapeutic goals. And generally this follows the individual's lead. So that means that the therapist is never going to take you into a deep reflective place until you are already ready to go into that place yourself. So when I ask you about your scribble that you've made, I might start off with saying, well, what did you see in it? What was that process like? Can you describe it for me? And you might say, oh, it kind of looks like a bunny. And then we might move into the metaphor place with things where I ask you, well, tell me about bunnies. What are bunnies for you? And then you might say, well, bunnies are fast and bunnies do this, or I know that it's the year of the bunny, whatever the association might be for you. And then that's when you might say, actually, I think my mother was born as the year of the rabbit. And that's where you go into the self-reflective place. So how do art therapists, I gotta minimize this or move this, sorry guys. How do they help with the creative process? So they take into consideration the benefits that different materials and activities may offer. So for example, different emotions, different issues are going to have a demand for different materials. I might suggest to someone who is struggling with issues around control or anger that we use clay. If clay is something that is not tactile, stimulating for them, or maybe they have an aversion to getting that clay under their nails, we might use a different material. But the important piece is that art therapists are going to know not only what materials are good for supporting those processes, but for also substituting in different ones. So say, for example, if I'm working with someone and they tell me that they're allergic to acrylic paints, and this has happened before, it's something that is a real thing. I might say, okay, well, if we can't use acrylics, then what can we use? And we might use something totally different. We might not even use watercolors. We might not use oils. We might go completely into a different place and use plasticine and practice with pushing it onto the paper instead. It's going to be different for every person. So one of the important things that an art therapist does is they have a threefold kind of coverage. They have a respect for the process. So understanding that if someone says, this is a mess, like this scribble that I made, that's a mess. I'm not going to correct you and say, it's not a mess, it's just a work in progress. If you say it's a mess, and that's completely okay. I also understand that that's where it is at this point in time, and later it might be something different. I have an acceptance of what it is and what it is not for you in that point in time. And I have a faith that when you are ready for something different, when you are ready for a different level of insight, you will get there on your own. All right. So art therapy and chronic pain. So pain is processed in the brain in two ways. We have the physical pain and we have that cognitive perception of the pain. So I know for many of you, this is all old news. You've done a lot of research on this for yourselves already, and you probably are aware of different ways that this works for the brain. Meditation is one of those ways that we can kind of help with recognizing that cognitive perception of the pain, the judgment behind it, and everything else. And we can kind of help to separate that process, and it helps to lessen the pain as well. When we have a diagnosis, we also have complex emotions that go hand in hand with it. The nice thing about making art is that it is a flow process, which means that it grounds you in the here and now. We're not slipping backwards into the state of judgment. We're not worried about the future as much. We are just in that process of making, and that helps to mitigate pain. The artwork that you see in front of you is made by an amazing artist. His name is Rylan. He was an art therapy client of mine for roughly 2.5 years. And I'll tell you guys a little bit about his story on the next slide. So Rylan was, I guess you would say he was a normal, if there's such a thing as normal, kid until he was about 5. He was then diagnosed with cerebral palsy. He had an episode which led to this BS. And it's often characterized by spastic muscle movements, clenching, other difficulties. He was in constant movement all the time. And it was really hard for him to even hold a utensil in his hand, much less to make art. So you'll see the picture of me with the 2 other adults. Those are his parents. They found me and they said, we're going to give this a try. We have no idea how it's going to go, but we'll see what happens. We tried lots of different methods to support him with holding the utensils himself. So sometimes it was a glove that fit over his hand that had a spot for the brush to go into, different things like that. Sometimes we put the paintbrush into a squeezy ball. But what we found actually worked the best for him was having the hand over hand method. So it was kind of like similar to a Ouija board, where I was kind of stabilizing him so that his hand was able to maintain contact with the canvas, and then he was able to make art. So what makes this really different is that when Rylan had made art in the past with different support workers or art classes, things like that, they always had an idea and a vision of what the final project should look like. So quite often that meant that they were shaping what he was making into what they thought it should be. And for Rylan, that felt really unauthentic. It was like this message that he had to be something that he wasn't. So when we went into this place of doing what we were doing with the hand over hand and following the movements, it was very different. His final work ended up looking more like these. So you can see that there's different lines here. There is the like very, I would call it spastic movements, where there's very jerky motions on the paper. But you can also see there's some rounder circular ones that kind of start to form. So with us doing that process of making art together, he would start to regulate. His breathing would change. He would start to have slower movements. Sometimes he would relax into the process to the point where he would almost close his eyes, have a very relaxed gaze, and he would make the yoga Om noise. And he was very nonverbal with his expressions. He still made noises to communicate and was communicative in other ways, but this is one of the times where that noise was very clear. It was very much, I'm relaxed, I'm here, I'm present. And in those moments, his spasms and everything else would still. They would completely quiet, and it was complete calm. So I think for him and his parents, they really saw the value of it, which was really helpful. It's a very fascinating process to witness. How are we doing for questions? Do we have any juicy ones popping up?
I have one. Heidi, what, if you go back to the previous one, I'm curious, what medium is that? Is that oil pastel? I'm just curious.
So Rylan did a lot of mixed mediums. So the one on the left there, we actually use plaster cast with this as well. So the plaster cast is one of those sensory pieces with it. So you're dipping the plaster into the, you're dipping it into warm water. Yeah,
okay.
And it's on the canvas. And with this one, it wasn't actually oil pastels, but they're Crayola markers. They're similar to oil pastels.
Okay.
They have a texture that's similar to lipstick. So they're very smooth gliding over the surface, and they're scented. So again, there's that sensory piece that plays into it.
Interesting. Very interesting. You're talking about the one on the right.
The one on the left is the one with the Crayola markers that are scented.
Okay.
I actually don't know if this is showing up the right way for you guys. I think it is. But yeah.
And what is the one on the right? That's looks like finger paint almost.
Close. It's using a brush, but these were paint pens that actually come with the paint in the handle of it, and you can reload them, which is fantastic. So we didn't have to spend time going back and forth to the paint palette either. We could just stay where we were on the canvas.
Interesting. Thank you for explaining. That's fascinating. Never heard of that media before.
All right, I'm curious. Are you is that kind of the calming down that Rylan experienced? Is that something that you often see? Like, is it something that a lot of the clients experience?
Yes, absolutely. So when we are in that art making process where we experience that flow state, quite often we're in the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're returning to that calm state. We're completely relaxed. We're letting everything just kind of be. And it's a really, really nice thing to see. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. It was so nice, in fact, that in the picture there where I'm holding up a little square paper, this was actually at Rylan's funeral when he passed away. His family chose, instead of flowers, to display his artwork, which was very touching. They felt it really conveyed who he was, which is beautiful.
Looks like your shirt there as well.
Yeah, so that was another medium that we did where we took t-shirts and we stretched them over a canvas and then he painted directly onto the t-shirts. It's really neat.
Nice.
All right, so art therapy and supportive healing. So we do know that the body tends to keep the score for us. There are things that our body is going to pick up on for us before we're able to consciously necessarily know what's going on. There's a sensory processing that takes place. It's nonverbal, and quite often we need to visualize what's going on if we're going to work with it. So think about when you walk into a room or a party or a family gathering of some sort. When you walk in, you might smell the food that's cooking in the kitchen. You might hear the sounds of the people that are present. You might also have the sense of what the temperature is like in the room. Oh, did they keep the thermostat down again? You're going to have all of these things that are being processed on a completely unconscious level. And you might become more aware of it when someone brings it to your attention, or when you realize something has bumped up against you and you're not necessarily comfortable with what's going on, or maybe you're really pleased with what's going on. At any rate, our body has a wealth of knowledge for us, and it's up to us to kind of figure out what's going on. So there is a beautiful textbook. I'll show it to you guys. This is Somatic Art Therapy. I'll probably show it backwards for you guys, but it's all about how art therapy can help with alleviating pain and trauma. It's actually a very recent one. It only came out in 2021, but the author, Joanne Hamill, she talks about her 30 years of work with how art therapy can help with alleviating pain. So it does so in many different ways. It helps to keep your focus off of the pain. It helps to make sense of it. It's relaxing. It reduces the anxiety. Again, we're going into that place with parasympathetic nervous system. It helps with mourning loss of physical functioning as well. So for some people, there's that place of, yeah, things are never going to be the same again. And how do we honor that? How do we move forward with that? It's a place of grief that we also have to honor. So there's a beautiful thing too about being in groups with art therapy. Sometimes just having that adequate social support can actually help decrease our perception of the pain. When we're surrounded by people who understand what we're going through, who care for us, support us, accept us for where we're at with things, who aren't going to look at our artwork and be like, oh my gosh, what did you just make? But instead say, wow, I get that. It's something that's really supportive for all of us. And there are studies that show that when we address psychological things that are going on for us below the surface, it can also help to reduce our pain, at least the perception of it. So I like to refer to collage as being the Trojan horse of art therapy. And that's because if a single image is worth 1,000 words, and you take a collage with magazine images and you've got 20 or 30 different images on this collage, that's a lot of words. So it's going to move quite quickly. And you might think, oh, it's not really my artwork. I just selected the images. Yes, you did select the images, and each one of those might hold a different meaning for you. It has a direct link with your unconscious mind and the feelings that are there too. We are, after all, emotional beings having a physical experience in the world. So when we're able to externalize these images, these feelings that we're having, these sensations, it also enables us to have a sense of control over what's going on. We can put it out there, we can see it, and we can talk about it more easily. It's helpful. So having an art therapist on hand can be really supportive when unexpected things come up in the art. Like I mentioned with the Trojan horse of collage, quite often people will talk about their artwork and then they'll have a little catch that comes up in their throat, and you know that they've stumbled on something. Something reminded them of like a memory or an experience they had, and quite suddenly they're back there remembering what happened. So it's always good to have someone there who can help with those little moments. Yeah. All right, some of the many, many benefits. So this goes for all art therapy, not just the ones that we're talking about in terms of helping with mitigating pain, but there is that place of self-mastery, being that we all have a sense of, I accomplished this, look what I made, this is so cool. Place of reflection being, wow, why did I make this? This is really neat. Who does it remind me of? problem solving. You can try different things. You can see what works and what doesn't work. You can experiment with it. You can connect with your peers, and you can also connect with other people about what they've made. It gives you something that you can talk about that's a shared experience. And of course, with having that place of, wow, look what I made and everything that goes with it, we experience increased self-esteem. We have gratitude for the experience, gratitude for each other as well. There's an open expression of those emotions that have been suppressed or pushed down for quite some time. It's incredibly meditative, relaxing, soothing, validating. It's incredible when you can make something and say, I don't really know what this is saying, but I can feel it. And quite often we experience emotions where we don't have the right words for it, but the art might. And that's a really cool thing. So just observing art making is therapeutic. So we're going to show you guys a little YouTube video. Bear with us. We'll see if this works. And I'm seeing a lot of questions popping up in the chat. So
The questions are, I think people want to get their hands dirty, are asking about doing more in the session, like themselves, what else they can do. I want to actually ask people, if you're comfortable, you can email me a picture of your picture that you've done, that you've come up with. And you can keep doing them through as we're listening to Heidi, but and then I'd like to post anybody who is willing to send them to me, and we'll post them up on our website. You have to include in your email permission for me to do that, but yeah, that would be lovely. Okay, you want to try just clicking on that and see if it goes?
perfect. Okay, so this is one way of doing magic milk or marbling on paper. So what you need basically is a bowl of milk. The fattier, the better. And you're going to put different drops of food coloring into it. And while in this video, what they do is use dish soap right away and put it onto it to get the colors to swirl and everything. What you can also do is use a toothpick or a popsicle stick or anything really. And you're going to make small little motions on the surface of the water. And that'll make the milk color kind of swirl into different neat designs and things like that on the top. So I'd recommend trying the swirling first. You can even just blow bubbles across the surface if that feels better. And then try the dish soap, because it'll be a completely different experience. Yeah.
Okay. Did you want me to share so that we can try and put the
Did that go?
Oh, it's an image. Do you have the actual link?
See if I can make the actual video show up. I thought that was playing just now. That's unfortunate.
No, I've given everyone the link here. I found it.
Oh, you typed it in?
I did in the
No.
chat.
In the chat, okay. Okay, well, looks like it's going to play for her.
Is it going now?
Yeah, it's playing, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot, hang on. Sorry, that's me. You have mute on. Did you want the mute off?
Mute on is okay for me. Yeah, I think it's sometimes useful because then we can also hear our own thoughts while we're watching the milk swirl.
Okay. And then you dip the paper into it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So the neat thing about when we're watching people make artwork like this is that it'll activate mirror neurons for ourselves. So mirror neurons are the things that are activated when you hear someone yawn, and then all of a sudden you have a compulsion to yawn. It's when you're sitting in a circle and we're in a group setting and you're thinking, man, I could really go for pizza for lunch. And the person beside you says, man, I really want pizza. Those are mirror neurons that are being activated. We may not know why or how, but it's happening around us all the time. Okay. And let's go back into the PowerPoint.
We have another question.
Yep.
It's from Art. His name is Art. He's been a long time member. Are you suggesting doing some kind, it says king, I think you mean kind of art can alleviate pain? And I believe it. You're saying yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to suggest this with a very gentle suggestion of it's going to be different for every person. And it's also about the psychological components of the pain as well. So for myself, someone might suggest to me, hey, have you tried sewing? And I'd probably say to them, no, and I'm not going to, because for me, that involves a lot of swearing. For me, it's a very frustrating process and it's not super helpful. But there are other things that I could do with it if I wanted to work with fabric. I might use a hot glue gun instead, so I don't have to fight with needle and thread or different things like that. So it is very much about how the process is supported. And that's where having an art therapist present can be really helpful, because they're going to say, okay, how are you doing right now with this? What is your focus on? Are you thinking more about the pain, or are you letting go of it and relaxing into this process? Do we need to change something and adjust what we're doing? And so they're able to work with you to kind of overcome those obstacles and to move forward. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. So here's just kind of the picture. Can you guys see my screen again?
Yeah.
It says, what are mirror neurons? Okay, awesome. Yeah. So when we see something, our brain lights up with the corresponding neurons.
Art had a follow-up question. While performing the activity, is it a distraction from the pain that is the therapy?
Not necessarily. Having a distraction from the pain can be useful, but it's more about going into that meditative state with things. So that's part of the reason why I bring up the magic milk prints, is because it's a very slow and mindful process. You're doing things like blowing bubbles across the surface. So you're working on that breathing aspect of things the same way you would in yoga or with meditation. And you're getting more into that place of focusing on the here and now. So it's letting go of that place of the pain and focusing more on what is here in front of me. What can I smell? What can I see? What can I taste? What is happening for me right now in this moment? And that process in itself can help reduce the perception of the pain. So I'll give you guys another example. In 2020, I think it was, I had a little bit of an accident and ended up going face first into a tree off of my bicycle. Broke my nose, had a concussion. It was great times. But when I was in the emergency room waiting to be seen by a doctor, there was a guy sitting beside me and he was clutching his hand. He had a great big gash on it right through here. And he was clutching it and rocking back and forth and just writhing with pain. And I was sitting there calmly and trying to, initiate some conversation with him. Meanwhile, I'm focusing on breathing through my mouth because I can't breathe through my broken nose. But he turns to me and he goes, "Why are you so calm?" And I could have given him, a typical response of, "Oh, it's women handle pain different," but that wouldn't have been fair. It was more so just that place of being able to separate the pain for myself. I was able to focus on the things that were keeping me grounded in the present. So focusing on my breathing, focusing on where I was, focusing on what I could smell, other things that were keeping me grounded. And that was able to give me a little bit of a distance from the pain, whereas he was very much focusing on that writhing and the pain that he was experiencing. Yeah. So these are some art therapy examples. We have sanctuary spaces. That's the one over here with the little terrarium. I love that one. It is wonderful. You can get those little containers at the dollar store. You can fill them up with whatever you feel is appropriate. They also have little figurines and things like that too. In this case, this client wanted to make it into more of like a garden terrarium. So she used live, what are those little green things? She used those anyway.
Succulents.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. So she used succulents in there and she used a variety of different things. And for her, it was about having a place where she could feel like she was at one with wherever she was. So she had a mermaid that felt like sometimes it was out of place in the world. But this little sanctuary space was where that mermaid could be themselves. They could go up on the land if they wanted to and not worry about it. And they could also be in the ocean if they needed to. So with that directive, quite often what I'll tell people is select the materials that feel right for you, and then choose a figure or any small little item like that that represents you and place it where it feels right in that sanctuary space. And for some people, it feels right to have a few different creatures or figures that they place into it. And that's good. If you want to go deeper with it and you don't have an art therapist present, I would encourage you to write a little bit about what you made. So think about the story of it, thinking about this mermaid. What is their story? So for that mermaid, the story was about feeling like they weren't belonging in their world and they needed a place where they did belong. Exploring that. And then we have altered books. So altered books are wonderful. It's a great way to utilize a book that has been destined for the bin. So you can rescue it and give it new life by doing things like painting into it, circling the words on the page that you want to keep. You can collage into it if you want, whatever the case might be. And so when we're circling the words that we want to keep, we're focusing on the things that we still have. We're finding the silver lining for ourselves. And quite often it makes really beautiful poetry. It's really nice. Okay.
Does that need to be like a lot of the papers in books is just recycled, and I think any kind of paint would just soak through and stuff like that. Does it need to be a certain kind of book or?
Not really. I generally use any paperback book or hardcover book, as long as you have your pages taped down to the table so that it doesn't flip open while you're working with it. You're generally okay. And quite often it'll turn into kind of an art journal. I have one, I don't have it on hand here right now, but I have one that kind of functioned as an art journal for me for about 4 years. And it's neat because every time I go back and I look at it, I will see different things. I will have new insights and new self-reflections about what that art was about. So even if I don't necessarily see it the first time around, I might think, I don't know what that's about. But I can come back to it later and say, oh, that's what was going on for me. Good to know. So yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so what does all of this mean for you? You have lots of options. Art therapists often provide groups, open studios, workshops, individual sessions. Quite often you can follow them on different things like Instagram or TikTok or other things, and they will give you little freebies, little things that you can do at home. Little activities that are kind of 5 to 10 minutes that will help you with being mindful and staying grounded in the moment, reduce your anxiety, lots of different things. I really enjoy Amelia Clark. She is on TikTok and has 140,000 followers. It's wild. But yeah, there's lots of different ones that you can do. Quite often art therapists will work with you to meet your needs. We'll select materials to maximize your benefits, and we can adapt those activities as needed. So as I mentioned, sometimes clay doesn't work for people. Sometimes drawing isn't something that they want to do. That's fine. There's lots of other things we can do. And you're not alone. So the pain experienced with neuropathy can be quite intense, and having adequate social support decreases the perception of pain. It can really be supportive with reducing the experience of it, at least the perception of it, and promoting neuroplastic and post-traumatic growth. So on that note, one of my colleagues is Charmaine, and she is a somatic art therapist. So she integrates quite a bit of body awareness and mindfulness into her practice. And I'll share her information at the end here too. She is absolutely amazing. And she has a few YouTube videos that are much longer in length, and they'll give you more insight and information into, how this can be beneficial for you and some things that you can do at home. Okay, let's do more questions.
Another simple activity. More encore, please. Another activity.
We don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have one in mind, that would be great.
Always have more. Okay, so this activity, the whole premise of it is to show how we all see different things in the artwork. I might look at this and see one thing, Linda might look at it and see something different, Louise might see something different as well. So very much our perception of it is subjective and going to be different from moment to moment as well as person to person. So if you guys wanted and you don't want to destroy a book, that's okay. But I would encourage you to take a book off of your shelf and flip to a random page, and then on a separate piece of paper, write down 3 words from that page that really jump out at you and grab your attention. Things that feel kind of juicy and like they're important in some way. I like that I get to watch Linda while she does this. And don't feel rushed. I know that we didn't tell you guys to come prepared with a book, so that's okay. Okay, so once you have your words written down on the page, I would encourage you to make art about those words. So the first things that come to mind when you see those words together. And if it's helpful to kind of expand upon each word, then you can. So think about why you chose mountain. What does mountain remind you of? Thinking about why you maybe chose that word. Is there a story around it? Is there a memory around it? And then kind of drawing or expanding on it and going from there.
Heidi, I want to thank you so very much. It was a fascinating topic. And I hope some people send me in their pictures so I can include them on the posting of the video. Yeah, I can't thank you enough for spending time with us and sharing your knowledge. It warms my heart when people can contribute this way.
Well, thank you guys as well for having me. It was an honor.